The morgue horror stories that you're about to see will show you that true terror doesn't always lie among the living, and that some bodies just won't accept eternal rest. Like the story you're about to see, where a morgue technician encounters a body that's too strange to be human, and when it comes back to attack, it's already too late to escape. But before we dive into the story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying tales. I worked for a few years in a morgue in Juneau, Alaska, back in the early 80s. It was an isolated place, cold all year round, with a silence that seemed to weigh on your shoulders. Sometimes I felt like time passed differently there, slower, as if the ice held the minutes back. My work partner was Josh, a medical examiner, Native American, a centered guy, one of those who seem to know more than they say. He had a calm demeanor, didn't talk much, but when he did, you wanted to listen. We made a good team. He handled the more technical parts, and I took care of the routine, organization, and bureaucratic stuff. But when needed, I'd roll up my sleeves too. There was one night in particular that I still remember in detail. I was feeling awful, had the flu, a fever, and thought about calling in sick, but I ended up going anyway. In the morgue, you don't really get to choose your days or hours. Death doesn't keep a schedule. Things started getting strange when a body arrived around 11 at night. It was a man, no ID, found on the outskirts of the forest, way south of the city. The police seemed a bit lost with the case, and when they pulled back the sheet covering the body, Josh and I exchanged a glance immediately. The guy didn't have a single hair on his body, not on his eyebrows, not on his scalp. His skin was very pale, almost whitish, and his face, it looked like it had been mutilated precisely, as if someone knew exactly where to cut. It wasn't crude. It looked almost surgical, you know? When we started examining the body, we noticed other strange things. Besides the facial wounds, there was a total absence of certain intimate parts. It didn't look like a rushed injury or mutilation. It was as if they had never been there. Josh stared at it for a few seconds, serious, not saying a word. I remember asking if that was normal. He just replied, in a low voice, "No." The body was cold, rigid, but not like the others I had seen. The rigor mortis seemed more intense than usual, as if the muscles were locked by something beyond death. I tried to move the guy's arm, and it was like trying to bend an iron bar. Josh, always methodical, started jotting everything down in his notepad, but you could tell it was getting to him. And to me too. I had seen strange things in there, but nothing like that. There was something wrong with that body, something we couldn't quite grasp right away. And that's when the night really started to unravel. We decided to do the autopsy that same night. Josh was the type who didn't leave anything for later, especially when something was out of the ordinary. I wasn't feeling well at all. My body felt hot inside and cold outside, but I stuck with him. At that moment, curiosity spoke louder than fatigue. We started the standard procedures: initial cut, visual exams, checking for possible fractures or internal bleeding. But what we found, or rather, what we didn't find, made everything even more confusing. There was no sign of internal trauma. None. The organs were there, apparently in good condition. No cuts, no clots. Nothing that explained the facial wounds or the state of the body. The blood seemed to coagulate differently, denser, almost as if it had aged too quickly. And the heart, it seemed too small. Josh even measured it again, thinking he had noted it wrong. I started feeling my head heavy, my vision a bit blurry. There was a pain in my temples that came in waves, as if someone was squeezing my skull from the inside. I told Josh I couldn't take it anymore, that I needed a break. But he didn't want to stop. He said it didn't make sense, that something was very wrong, and he needed to keep going. I left him in the lab and went to the back room. I slumped into one of the torn armchairs and closed my eyes, but I didn't even get to sleep. About 10 minutes later, I heard a metallic sound coming from the lab. It was as if some instrument had fallen to the floor, but that wasn't all. There was a kind of creaking, something between a muffled grunt and the sound of something being dragged, I got up, a bit groggy, thinking Josh might have dropped something. When I got to the lab door, the place was silent again, but the scene I saw made me freeze. The body, that body we had just opened, was sitting on the gurney. Not lying down, sitting, and worse. In its hand were Josh's glasses, those same round glasses he always wore with the frame a bit bent from falling so many times. The corpse held the glasses as if they were its own, as if it was waiting for someone. I looked around for Josh, but he wasn't there. And that's when my stomach turned, because that body, it shouldn't have been standing, it shouldn't have been moving. But there it was, completely still, and yet totally out of place. I stood there frozen, staring at the body that now seemed almost alive. And before I could react, everything happened very quickly. The corpse let out a low sound, almost a growl, and in a completely impossible movement, it lunged at me. Its arm grabbed mine with force, and suddenly, I felt a sharp pain. It bit me. I screamed in pain, trying to break free, but the bite was so strong it felt like it was trying to tear the flesh. I tried to push it away, but the body wouldn't budge. It was like being stuck in an endless nightmare. That's when Josh appeared, running. He grabbed the corpse with both hands and, in a brutal movement, broke the man's jaw with a sharp blow. The body released my arm, falling back onto the gurney with a dull thud. My skin was torn, and blood was flowing freely. Josh helped me up and dragged me to the exam table. I don't know how he did it so fast, but what I do know is that the pain was immense. My vision was blurry, my body already weak, and the pain in my arm was unbearable. He looked at me and said I needed a transfusion as quickly as possible. The ambulance arrived minutes later, and there I was, lying on a cold bed, not really understanding what was happening. The pain was so intense I could barely process the details. I just remember the hospital gave me a blood transfusion and put me under observation. But the story didn't end there. When Josh and I returned to the morgue, the body was gone. Yes, vanished. There was no sign it had been removed by anyone. No traces, neither on the floor nor on the gurney. It was as if the corpse had evaporated. All that remained was a void, a feeling that it had never happened, like a collective hallucination. That day, and everything that happened, really got to me. It wasn't long before Josh and I decided to leave the morgue. It was no longer a place where we felt safe, neither physically nor mentally. Josh distanced himself, focused on other things, and I went my own way, also far from that nightmare. We both sought new paths, new careers, new ways of living. But Alaska, the morgue, the body, that never left me. Every time I look at my arm, I still get chills. And who knows, maybe one day, what really happened that night. Because to this day, I have no answer. What a horror. What did you think of the story? Rate it from 0 to 10 and leave your opinion in the comments. After hearing knocks coming from inside a freezer, you start to realize that even the dead don't stay quiet for long. But what happens when the bodies aren't buried, but cremated? The story you're about to see takes place in a funeral home where the heat of the furnace hides something even colder than death. I deal with the dead every single day. I've worked at the morgue for 16 years, washing bodies, closing caskets, listening to stories of grief that would keep anyone awake at night. After all this time, you'd think nothing in this world could scare you. But that's when life grabs you by the throat and whispers in your ear, "You really think you've seen it all, fool?" I've been married for exactly the same amount of time, 16 years. I met my wife in high school. Two young fools swearing eternal love on the back stairs of the school. And you know what's crazy? Until last week, I still believed in that nonsense. We lived well, or at least I thought we did. She made coffee for me every morning. I massaged her feet after work. It seemed perfect. But life has a way of throwing curveballs. We were drowning in debt. We had to move into the basement of Richard's house, my best friend since college days. He said it wasn't a favor, that we were family. I swallowed my pride along with the bitter coffee my wife made in that old coffee maker. At least we had a roof over our heads, right? That Friday, I decided to go out with the guys from the morgue. Some gentleman's club downtown, a dirty place, bad beer, but it was our refuge. I didn't tell her. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted to pretend for a few hours that I still had control over my own life. When I got in the car to head back, my phone blew up with notifications. 23 missed calls, all from her. My stomach turned into a knot of ice. She never called like that, not even when her mom died. When I looked up, I saw a column of smoke rising on the horizon, lit up by the red of the sunset. Richard's house was burning like hell on earth. I threw the car onto the sidewalk and ran like a madman. The heat from the flames hit my face 10 meters away. Firefighters were shouting orders, the hose spitting water that evaporated before it even touched the inferno the house had become. I screamed until I was hoarse, but the fire only responded with roars, devouring wood, concrete, and, God forgive me, 2 lives I knew so well. The next day, the investigators gave their verdict: gas leak. A tragic but common domestic accident. Neighbors brought pots of food and pitying looks, as if a chicken casserole could fix an empty casket. Only I knew the truth. Because before I left that night, I turned the gas knob all the way up. I placed that cheap lighter on the stove, set the oven timer. It was as easy as closing a dead man's eyes. But now, with the smell of burnt flesh still lingering in the air, I finally understood. Some ghosts you create with your own hands, and they never, ever leave you alone. It all started with a phone left in the bathroom. 2 days before the fire, I saw the screen light up with his name, Richard, with a heart emoji next to it. My blood ran cold before I even swiped to see what I shouldn't have. Intimate photos, videos that made me want to vomit, messages detailing meetups during my lunch break at the morgue, my best friend and my wife laughing at me while I dressed corpses with a tenderness she never had for me again. The anger came first, that blind fury that makes your hands shake and your vision darken. Then came the plan. Working among the dead every day, you learn how a body can disappear without a trace. A fire would be perfect, clean, quick, definitive. The gas turned on, the oven timer set, the lighter positioned. I did it all with the steady hands of someone who's turned 1,000 bodies on the autopsy table. But nothing prepared my heart for seeing her in the casket. Even with her skin marked by the flames, I still recognized every curve of her face. People around me cried for the poor wife, for the inexplicable tragedy. I bit my tongue until it bled, swallowing the words that burned in my throat. She deserved it. When I leaned in for the last kiss, her embalming perfume mixed with the smell of charred flesh. That's when I heard it, clear as day, a whisper from those still lips. "You'll never get rid of me." The air escaped my lungs. The gravedigger next to me didn't react. But I knew. She was there. In the days that followed, forgiveness came like a knife in the chest. I still loved her, God help me. I loved the 16 years of shared mornings, the silly jokes over breakfast, the way she fixed my tie before important funerals. This pain was worse than any remorse for the fire I started. Now, when I enter the morgue, I feel her gaze in every corner, in the shadows that move too fast, in the cold wind that comes from nowhere, in the scent of her shampoo that sometimes fills the air among the corpses. People say, "Poor guy," when I pass, but they don't see the nail marks that appear on my arm at night, or hear the footsteps that echo behind me in the empty hallways. I prepare the bodies of others with increasingly shaky hands. She watches, waits, and I know that when my day comes, it will be her who receives me on the other side, with that smile that was once sweet and is now just bones and ashes, because I made a promise in that casket. And in death, unlike love, promises are eternal. She's with me forever. Shocking, right? When the flames die down and something still moves among the ashes. It's because not even fire could destroy what was there. And sometimes the evil presence doesn't need bodies or ashes, just an abandoned scene and a toy in the wrong place, like in the story you're about to see, where a simple recording turned into a living nightmare. For over a decade, I've walked the cold corridors of the Blackwater morgue. 10 years of cleaning blood, arranging broken limbs, closing eyes that will never open again. I thought I'd seen everything death had to show, until I met the mourning widow. That name now makes the toughest men in town cross the street to avoid our gate when the moon is high. And after you hear what happened, you'll do the same. It all started with Celia Graves, a woman so ordinary you'd pass her on the street without noticing, except for her eyes. Two deep wells of sadness that burned slowly, like a candle at the end of its wick. In 1983, her husband, Thomas Graves, was one of 6 men swallowed by the copper mine in Death Valley. They say the crash of the collapse was heard 3 miles away, but Celia knew before anyone else. At the exact moment of the accident, she fell to her knees in the middle of Main Street, screaming as if she'd been stabbed in the back. Her grief wasn't the quiet, resigned kind you usually see. Celia went mad in a slow, painful way. Every day, as soon as the sun rose, she'd appear at the mouth of the abandoned mine with an unlit lantern in her hand, calling for Thomas as if he had simply gotten lost in the dark. When they closed the mine, she started wandering the desert, and that's when it got really scary. Carters passing by the old road swore they saw her standing in the middle of nowhere, talking animatedly to the empty air. Sometimes she'd laugh, other times she'd argue. Always with 2 cups of tea on the rotten wooden table she carried everywhere. One for her, one for him who would never return. The winter of 1989 was cruel to Celia. They found her lying in bed in her shack, dressed in the same crumpled wedding gown she'd worn since her husband's funeral. Her blue lips still seemed to be whispering something when the doctor arrived. "Heartbreak," he said, cleaning his glasses with a handkerchief. "But I saw the body when it got here, and I'll tell you something else. It looked like she had died of fright. Her eyes wide open, her mouth in a final silent scream, her fingers twisted like claws into the mattress, as if she had seen something terrible coming for her. On the night they brought Celia here, the thermometer read 10 degrees below zero, but it wasn't just the December cold that made the men shiver. The simple pine coffin seemed to weigh much more than it should, as if something inside was trying to get out. When we placed it on the preparation table, I swear I heard a scratching sound coming from inside the wood. Old Pete, our night watchman, made the sign of the cross and ran out before we even removed the funeral shroud. The next day, stories were already spreading. Pete swore he spent the whole night hearing a woman humming an old lullaby in the empty corridors. The music always stopped in front of the morgue door, replaced by a desperate cry that made him lock himself in the supply closet until dawn. I laughed in his face, of course. I've worked with the dead long enough to know that corpses don't haunt anyone. Until that damn day, when I was assigned to prepare Celia Graves. The preparation room usually smells of disinfectant and formaldehyde, but when I opened the door that afternoon, the air was heavy with the scent of old lavender. The same perfume the older women in town used to wear in the 1980s. Celia's body was covered by a white sheet, but I noticed something strange right away. The fabric rose and fell slightly, as if she were still breathing. I approached slowly, my hands sweating inside the rubber gloves. When I pulled back the sheet, I almost fell backward. Celia's eyes, which the coroner swore he had closed personally, were wide open. And that wasn't all. Her dilated pupils seemed to follow me as I moved, fixed on a point just behind my head. That's when I felt it, that cold breath on the back of my neck so close it made the hairs on my arm stand up under my shirt. Someone was there, breathing in my ear. I knew I shouldn't, but I turned around. My blood froze when I saw the reflection in the steel counter. There, clearly behind me, was a figure that shouldn't exist. Her faded dress swayed as if it were living fabric, her black hair floating in a wind that didn't exist in that sealed room. But it was her eyes that paralyzed me. 2 dark craters of anguish that seemed to span decades, piercing me to the soul. When I turned, the air escaped my lungs. Celia Graves was there, but not as the corpse I had left on the table. Her spectral body emitted a milky light, revealing through its transparency the bricks of the wall behind her. Her feet didn't touch the ground. She floated a few centimeters off the floor, as if suspended by invisible strings. The silence was more terrifying than any scream. Her lips moved frantically, forming words that my ears didn't catch, but that echoed directly in my mind like distant echoes. "He's not complete," she seemed to say. "I need to find all the parts." When her ghostly hand reached out toward me, a sharp pain shot through my chest. It was as if 1,000 ice needles were piercing my flesh at once. Her almost transparent fingers passed through my arm, and in that moment of contact, horrifying visions flooded my mind like a deluge. First, the deafening crash of the mine collapse, followed by muffled screams echoing through the underground galleries. Then, fragments of Thomas scattered in the darkness, pieces of a man who would never be whole again. Celia appeared next, her hands bloody, frantically sifting through the wreckage with a determination born of despair, as if she could piece him back together with her pain. And then, something worse, something that lurked in the depths of the mine, something not human, watching everything with a presence that chilled my blood, something that might still be there, waiting. And then, like a breath extinguishing a candle, she vanished. But the presence remained. The scent of damp earth and lavender filled the room. On the table, Celia's physical corpse now had its eyes wide open, its mouth twisted in a silent scream. In the following weeks, the morgue became a living nightmare. The whispers were no longer just audible. They could be felt, like spiders crawling on the back of your neck. At 3:17 a.m., always at the same time, the faucets in the basement would gush muddy water that smelled like the abandoned mine. Old James found small, feminine handprints on the walls of the autopsy room, in places impossible to reach, near the ceiling. The entire town fell under a strange haze of hysteria. At the grocery store, bottles would explode for no reason. At the bar, the mirrors would reflect a woman in mourning even when the place was empty. And every night, without fail, the town's dogs would howl toward the cemetery, as if they were seeing their own death. I later found out that Thomas Graves never had a proper burial. Only pieces of him were found. The mine became his tomb. And Celia, she didn't just want to find her husband. She wanted to complete him, to gather every fragment left behind in that dark, damp place. To this day, when the night mist descends over Blackwater, I see figures near the old mine. Two of them, a woman, bent over, searching the ground, and behind her, a male figure, incomplete, like a poorly assembled puzzle. Sometimes in the dead of night I still hear the whispers in the morgue. But now there are two, and they're getting stronger, closer, because in Blackwater, some loves are so strong that not even death can separate them, and some searches only end when the last trace is found. Celia's grave in the cemetery is always covered in fresh flowers, though no one admits to putting them there. And if you pass by at midnight, pay attention. Sometimes among the headstones you can see two sets of footprints in the frost, a pair of miner's boots, and beside them, the small tracks left by a bride's shoes. How eerie. A doll laughing by itself in a forgotten hospital would be enough to never go back there. But the next account shows that not everything that moves is alive. Like the body that, even prepared for burial, decided to give one last sign. And it wasn't subtle. But before we continue with the story, if you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying our stories. So go ahead and like the video to let YouTube know you like this kind of content, and don't miss any more horror stories. Working in a morgue wasn't exactly anyone's childhood dream, but for me, it was the easiest way to pay for medical school. While my classmates were doing internships in bustling hospitals, I spent my nights surrounded by silence and corpses. It wasn't glamorous, but it had one advantage. I could study anatomy for real without any rush, and I had a special interest: hearts. You know, that perfect machine that beats nonstop for a lifetime and then, suddenly just stops. I'd spend hours analyzing veins, arteries, muscles, trying to understand what made it work or stop working. It was almost an obsession. That night, everything started normally. I arrived, did my routine check to make sure everything was in place. But it wasn't. One of the bodies wasn't in its compartment. A man, around 50 years old, who must have arrived that afternoon. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty space, a chill running down my spine. Someone must have moved it without telling me, I thought, trying to convince myself. But I was the only one with access to the morgue on that shift. The manager had gone on vacation the week before and left everything under my responsibility. I took a deep breath and started checking the other compartments one by one. Nothing, until in the last corridor, I found the body. It was there, lying on an exam table, as if someone had started a procedure and simply given up. But I didn't remember anyone scheduling an autopsy for that night. And worse, I was sure that wasn't where he was supposed to be. I looked around expecting to see someone, a colleague, a doctor, anyone who could explain it. But the morgue was empty. Just me, the dead, and that out-of-place body. I finished my shift and left the morgue that night with that unease still clinging to me. That out-of-place body, the exam table, none of it made sense. But exhaustion got the better of me, and I decided to think about it the next day. But then, already in the parking lot, I realized I'd forgotten my phone inside, on the office desk. I grumbled, turned around, and opened the door again. The cold air of the morgue hit my face, that smell of disinfectant and stillness. I was almost at the office when I heard it. Clunk, a dry metallic sound coming from the compartment room. It sounded like when you pull a steel drawer suddenly. My heart raced. I had just checked everything, there was no one there. Did someone come in? I thought, trying to convince myself it was a rat, the refrigeration system, anything. But I knew it wasn't. I walked slowly, holding my breath. When I got to the door of the room, I looked down the corridor of compartments and he was there. The same 50-year-old man's body. But now he wasn't lying on the table anymore. He was sitting on the edge of it, as if someone had placed him there on purpose. His feet dangled, his toes almost touching the floor. His head was slightly tilted forward, as if he were looking at something on the ground. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I just froze, feeling the blood in my veins turn to ice. After a few seconds that felt like hours, I swallowed hard and entered the room, looking around. Nothing. No one. Just that corpse sitting there, still, as if it were waiting for something. I approached him hesitantly and looked around. There were no drag marks, no footprints, nothing. It was as if he had simply gotten up by himself. "You're going crazy," I murmured to myself, placing a hand on the man's chest to lay him down again. The skin was cold, rigid, full rigor mortis. There was no way he could have moved. But he had moved. I searched the entire room, checked every corner, every door. Nothing. The morgue was empty, as it should be. Just me and the dead. And that body that insisted on not staying in place. In the end, I laid the man back in the compartment, closed it tightly, and got out of there faster than I should have. On the way back, I swore I heard another noise coming from behind me, but I didn't look back. And that night, for the first time, I slept with the light on. The next day, I barely managed to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that body sitting on the table, staring at me with its lifeless eyes. I arrived late for work, my head still heavy. When my phone rang, it was the police. "We need you to come to the morgue now. There's been an incident." The sheriff's voice was tense, and I felt that chill down my spine again. Something was very wrong. When I arrived, the morgue was surrounded by patrol cars, yellow tape, and officers with stern faces. The sheriff pulled me inside before I could ask anything, and then I saw the bodies. It wasn't just that 50-year-old man. This time, several corpses were out of their compartments. Some were lying on the floor, others propped against the walls as if they had been dragged. But the worst was the way they were positioned. Arms intertwined, legs spread, hands in places they shouldn't be. And the expressions. Some faces were frozen in something that looked like pleasure, others in pure terror. "Were you the last one to leave last night?" the sheriff asked, watching my reaction. I nodded, trying to process what I was seeing. "Yes, but I swear I left everything normal. Just that older man's body was out of place, but What body?" He cut me off, his eyes narrowing. I explained what had happened the night before, but I already knew how it sounded. Crazy. They took me to the station, asked me questions for hours. They wanted to know if I had any psychological issues, if I used drugs, if I had any fetish for corpses. I denied everything, of course. There was no way to prove it wasn't me, but they also had no evidence against me. In the end, they let me go. Lack of evidence, they said, but I knew they were still watching me. But there was one detail the police hadn't told me, and that I found out by accident when one of the medical examiners let it slip. The bodies hadn't just been moved. Someone, or something, had abused them, and I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. If it wasn't me, and if the morgue was locked, who did it? The police decided to keep surveillance on the morgue after what happened. 2 officers would be on duty at night, and even though I was still scared, I offered to accompany them. I needed to understand what was going on. The place was even more eerie than usual, as if the walls had absorbed the horror of the past few days. With every step, I expected to hear a noise, see something move. But nothing. Just the heavy silence and the suspicious glances of the police. While we were going through the files looking for clues, something fell out of a drawer. It was a passport, the manager's. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. The exit visa from the country was stamped with the date he was supposed to have left. But the entry stamp was blank. He had never returned, or rather, he had never left. The police didn't seem to understand the gravity of it at first. Maybe he traveled without his passport, one of them suggested. But I knew the manager. He was meticulous, the kind of person who wouldn't cross the street without his ID. And then came the question no one wanted to answer. If he wasn't on vacation, where was he? They never found his body. Not alive, not dead. The police searched the entire morgue, the surroundings, nothing. Only one certainty remained. Someone, or something, was there those days. Something that moved among the dead, that touched them, that dragged them. And the manager? Well, there are 2 possibilities. Either he was responsible for all of it, a monster who hid among corpses doing things I don't even want to describe, or he became part of whatever was acting there. Sometimes in my nightmares, I still see that 50-year-old man sitting on the table. And now, every time I close my eyes, I wonder if that night there was something more in the room with me, something that might still be there, waiting. What a scary story. What did you think of it? On a scale from 0 to 10, what rating would you give it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do let me tell you something that happened to me, and to this day it still makes me shiver just thinking about it. I was a medical student in my final year, and I managed to get an internship at a hospital here in the city. I thought I was going to learn a lot, help patients, you know. But reality was quite different. They threw me into the morgue. Yep, the basement where the dead wait for autopsies or release for funerals. My job? Transporting and storing bodies. Nothing glamorous, just hard work and that smell of disinfectant mixed with something indescribable. If it weren't for Mike, my buddy who started the internship with me, I would have lost it on the first day. We'd known each other since college, and he always had a way of making even the most bizarre situations bearable. After a while, we got transferred to the night shift. I'll admit, it was a relief. Less hustle, fewer people bugging us, and we got paid extra for the late hours. We'd be there between one body and another, trying not to go crazy from boredom. That's when Mike had the idea to bring a deck of cards. Blackjack to pass the time, he said. And so we'd be, playing cards between coffees, while the dead waited quietly in their refrigerated drawers. It seemed chill, you know? Too chill. We'd even joke that it was the easiest job in the world. But we had no idea what was about to go down that night. The night was dragging on, and I couldn't take it anymore. My eyes were heavy and my body desperately needed a minute of rest. Mike noticed and gave me a pat on the shoulder. Go ahead, man. Take a nap in the office. If any bodies come in, I'll call you. I didn't think twice. I went to the little corner where we kept the papers, closed my eyes, and passed out. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke up to a strange noise. Someone knocking on the morgue door. When I opened it, I saw a red-haired nurse I'd never seen before. She was pale, her eyes kind of glazed over, and she whispered, "There's a body coming in, prepare the table." I just nodded, still half asleep, and she quickly disappeared down the dark hallway. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to process. Something didn't add up. Usually we'd get a phone call, not a personal visit. But tired as I was, I ignored the bad feeling and went to wake Mike. "A body's coming in," I said, rubbing my eyes. He got up and we prepared the table like we always did. A few minutes later, the morgue door opened again, and 2 staff members brought in a gurney covered with a white sheet. We signed the paperwork, they left, and it was just us and the body. "Let's do this," Mike sighed, pulling back the sheet. And that's when my blood ran cold. Under the sheet, lying there, cold and lifeless, was the same red-haired nurse who had told us about the body. I looked at Mike, and he looked at me. We both froze. But she was just here 5 minutes ago," I stammered, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. Mike checked her pulse, confirming the obvious. No pulse, no breath, dead for hours at least. And then we heard it. Knock, knock. Someone knocking on the morgue door again. Knock, knock. That knock made us jump. Mike and I stared at each other, both holding our breath. I didn't want to open it. But the sound came again, more insistent. Knock, knock. With a trembling hand, I went to the door and pulled the latch. And there she was, the red-haired nurse standing, alive. The same clear eyes, the same auburn hair. But now she was smiling. A wrong smile, like the corners of her mouth were being pulled by invisible strings. "Have you prepared the body?" she asked, her voice not quite right. I looked back at the table where her corpse was still lying. When I turned back to the door, she was gone. The hallway was empty. Mike almost had a breakdown. "What the hell, man?" he shouted, knocking over chairs as he backed away. I wasn't any better. My legs were shaking and my stomach was churning like I was going to be sick. We rushed to the office and pulled up the security camera footage. Nothing. No record of that nurse entering or leaving the morgue. Just us and the staff who brought in the body. But the worst part? When we went back to the room, the table was empty. Her body had disappeared. Right then, I grabbed my phone and called the supervisor. "I'm out. I'm not coming back here." I didn't wait for a response. I left my badge on the table and bolted. I left the hospital that night with cold hands and my mind racing. I couldn't go back to my apartment. The thought of being alone in that silence terrified me. So I went straight to my brother's place. When he opened the door and saw me looking like a wreck, pale and sweating, he didn't even ask. He just pulled me inside and handed me a glass of water. I was shaking so much I spilled half of it. I tried to explain, but the words came out all jumbled. The only thing I could say clearly was, "There's something wrong with that hospital." The next few days were worse. I couldn't sleep. Every shadow made me jump, every noise made my skin crawl. Even the simple ring of the phone gave me a heart attack. My brother tried to help, saying it must have been just exhaustion, a hallucination from the night shift. But we saw it, you know. Mike saw it too. And that footage that showed nothing. The worst was when I found out that the red-haired nurse really did exist. A staff member who had died in an accident 3 years before my internship. When I told Mike, he freaked out and quit the same day. After that, I could never step into a hospital again without feeling that chill down my spine. I gave up on medicine. All that blood, those silent hallways, the smells. It all reminded me of her. Today I work in graphic design, something far away from corpses and morgues. But some nights, when the wind hits the window hard, I still wake up sweating. Because I swear I hear knock knock and a voice whispering, "Have you prepared the body?" So, did you make it to the end without hiding under the covers? If you did, drop a "I'm not sleeping tonight" in the comments. I want to know who braved it all the way to that final knock. And if you're not subscribed yet, join the crew. Every week there are new stories for people like you who can't resist a good scare. Oh, and if this video sent chills down your spine, that like button really helps us keep bringing you more of these creepy tales. For those who want a full binge, there's a whole playlist of stories like this. Just click on the side and keep the vibe going. But maybe pace yourself, okay? Sometimes daylight, or at least a nightlight, is your best friend. See you next time.